This is our Hanukkah class.
Yeah.
So we're taking a bit of a hiatus from our good friend Ruth Calderon, only because she didn't do any of the mythical stories about Hanukkah. And what we are going to look at is the myth of Hanukkah. And I use the word myth not as if to ask, is this true? Did it happen this way? But there is a Hanukkah myth, and it is a very clear myth about the miracle of the oil, and that it lasted for 8 days and nights instead of just for one day, as was expected. We're going to read that story as it stands in the Talmud, and then we're going to ask, why is this the story? Why is this the myth? What does this myth talk about? What is this myth trying to convey about this holiday, about the whole battle of the Maccabees? And we're going to look at some other texts that tell very different stories, which only highlights this question of what is the story of Hanukkah? Why have we chosen to tell this story? So I got a little enthusiastic and gave us lots of text, but we're not going to be able to read all of this. We're going to spend a little bit of time first on that miracle of the oil myth, and then we'll briefly read through some other ways of telling this story, and finally end by asking that question of what is the real, quote unquote, real story of Hanukkah, or why are we telling this version of the Hanukkah story? So I'm going to share my screen, and then we will get started. So that did not, okay, what I just did was not what I meant to do. So I have too many things open.
I guess it's hit or miss.
Oh, Vezmir, welcome, Gloria. Good to have you. We needed that. Okay. All right. Got it out of your system?
Yes.
No, you didn't.
I did.
Okay. So, the story in the Talmud is very brief. There is no tractate called the Tractate of Hanukkah. There is no tractate in the Mishnah called the Tractate of Hanukkah. The tractates of the Talmud come from the Mishnah. And so one of the questions we'll ask is, why is Hanukkah sort of downplayed in the mind of Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, the editor of the Mishnah? So they squeeze it in another tractate, the Tractate of Shabbat. And the question is, my Hanukkah, what is Hanukkah? What is the nature of Hanukkah? Why are we celebrating Hanukkah? The Tanu Rabbanan, as the rabbis taught, the sages taught. That means an earlier text, Tanu means a Braita, Mishnaic era text, has taught this following tale. And our translator tells us where it came from. It came from Megillat Ta'anit, an earlier text, which is not one of the Mishnaic. It's sort of an external document. On the 25th of Kislev, the Chafhei Bekislev, Yomei de Chanukah Tmanya. There are 8 days of Hanukkah. And on those days, Inon Delo Lemisped Behon, Delo Hitanot Behon, they have the status of not quite a festival, they're not Passover level festival, but they are days when we don't eulogize, we don't fast. So these have a kind of a sacred nature or a festive nature. We don't say a hesped, a eulogy, about a deceased on certain happy days like Rosh Chodesh, for example, which is not a festival like Passover, but has an elevated status. The way that works practically is someone gets up and says, we don't say eulogies on this day, so I'm just going to tell you a little bit about her life. Okay. And then they proceed to maybe tell a little bit less or a little different, but many people find a way to honor their loved one without, quote unquote, eulogizing. In some communities, they really just don't have a speech because there's no eulogy.
Seems so unfair.
Yeah, so that's why in our communities, we don't really see that big of a difference. So it's a way of saying these days have a certain status on the Jewish calendar. Why? When the Greeks entered the sanctuary of the temple, they defiled the oils, meaning they made them impure. They had been protected as pure oils for the lighting of the menorah, and they became impure. Ukeshegavra malchut beit Chashmonai, when the Hashmonaim dynasty became strengthened, or overcame them, v'nitzchum, and won, emerged victorious. But they checked, v'lo matzu, they didn't find only ela pach echad shel shemen, shehaya munach bechotamo shel kohen gadol, one little cruse of oil that had the seal of the high priest that was somehow preserved and found, and it's sealed means it's still pure. There was only enough to light for one day. And a miracle happened, and it was enough to be lit for 8 days. Lishana acheret, and the following year, they established them, the asaum, and made them yamim tovim, festive days, the Hallel v'hoda'ah, days of Hallel, and praise and thanksgiving to God. That's the story of Hanukkah. Pretty simple.
Yeah.
Who were the Greeks? Why were they there? Who were the Hashmonaim? Where's Judah Maccabee? None of this emerges at all. So Hanukkah, as we say, is a minor holiday, but usually what that means is a technical term sort of related to what I had just said. It's not a biblical holiday. It's not a holiday when I can't drive and I can't use my phone and I feel like it's Shabbat and I have extended prayers and a different musaf, like all these things that are liturgical. We add Hallel and we add this Al Hanisim, these praises, but otherwise it's a work day and it's minor. It's minor in that sense, but it's also minor in the place that it achieved in the rabbinic literature. This is basically it. This is the story. Then you have other conversations around where do you light the Hanukkah menorah? Where do you light the candles? How long do the candles? Like you have all of that because it's been codified in Jewish law and Jewish practice. But it's in the book of the Maccabees, this older text, that more of the story gets told. And there was a time period when there are debates about what goes into the canon of the Tanakh and what doesn't go into the canon. Should the book of Esther be in the canon? Should the book of Kohelet, Ecclesiastes, be in the canon? And the book of the Maccabees does not get into the canon. So it remains what we call Apocrypha. And it's no less a book, but it's not canonized. So it is less a book, actually.
Yeah.
It's not canonized in the Hebrew Bible. The book of the Maccabees apparently was written originally in Hebrew, but we only have it in its Greek form, and here it is in a Hebrew and in English, and the academics will have field day about when was it written, who was it written by, who are these Jewish authors writing about these wars of the Maccabees, and they even observe two very different voices from the Maccabees 1 to Maccabees 2, two different kinds of ways of telling the same story. So that's what we're going to look at, actually. We're going to look at a little bit of Maccabees 1, then we're going to look at a bit of Maccabees 2, and then we're going to, again, ask this question, then what is the story of the oil? Because that's not the story that's told in the book of the Maccabees at all, at all. So you have a question, Marilyn.
I was just thinking, the Greek, when it was written in Greek, was it the Greek phonetics for Hebrew, or was it the Greek language?
I would imagine the Greek language in Greek, but you know what? It's all Greek to me.
You two are hanging out together. Now we're all
Actually, I feel like let's just go back to this Talmud story for a moment. I didn't give it the love and attention it deserves because I feel like we have so many texts that I want to look at. But really, this is our primary text. So let's give it a moment. And let's treat it the way that we've been treating all of these stories. What are the characters? What are the images? What is important in this text? It's the Greeks, it's the sanctum, the Heichal, and it's the oils being defiled. So it's impurity in a space that is purity. What else do you see in this story? Anybody in the room or the Zoom room?
I'm afraid they can't see you. We don't see your picture.
I turn my camera off because they see me in the
Oh, they see you somewhere else?
owl.
Okay, good.
the owl. They see
Just
me.
wondering.
I don't know where. Oh, we hid the selfie. That's
Okay, good.
if you show a selfie, you'll see.
Okay.
the owl.
Well,
Okay.
I have a question.
Thank you.
Is it a gratuitous act of barbarism that the Greeks invaded the holy space? I mean, were they provoked? Were they threatened by the Jews becoming too elevated in the society? What
Right.
provoked it?
So the part that isn't told here is the way that they were trying to eliminate the Jewish practices, specifically of Shabbat, of circumcision, and of not
Was
eating
it
pork.
threatening to them in
And-
some way?
My sense is that wasn't especially about the Jewish people. It was about, any
Faction that was
distinct,
different than.
culture, in the spread of Hellenism and in the spread of,
They couldn't tolerate
The Greek ethos.
anything that was an aberration of their culture.
yeah, I mean, does anyone have another way of putting it?
I
Marilyn?
think it had to do with the melding of the political and the religious. And for the Greeks, the religious part was encroaching on the political.
So this is the story, what you're saying, this is the story that we're gonna see now in First Maccabees. The political leadership being distinct meant that they retained autonomy in Judea.
Mhm.
And that would be a threat.
Okay.
But they had a national identity, whether it's a national religious identity or any national identity. Those two wouldn't be distinguished one from the other,
But the
right?
politics came from Rome,
Right,
and they couldn't.
they wouldn't
In
tolerate,
Israel, it was
independence.
Israel and Judea,
Mhm,
it was a theocracy.
right,
So there was this conflict, and as long as the theocracy knew its position, everything was okay. But being Jewish,
mhm.
yeah, I'm being cynical, I shouldn't say that.
Mm-hmm.
But it started to encroach,
Yeah.
and they felt threatened,
Okay.
and they didn't
So-
want, and with the Messiah, and it was that.
None of that,
hate.
and none of that is in here. So who are
No.
the characters that are in here? The high priest, who's a religious symbol, and a miracle,
Hmm.
God acting on their behalf. God is saving us from our enemies. That's the narrative with a miracle, or we've made our way
Mm.
in. I mean, it doesn't say the enemies, but God is giving us a miracle to restore our religion.
Mhm. It's symbolic,
That it-
actually, and
that-
we shouldn't be extinguished.
Yes, okay, so we'll get to that too.
Okay.
And that, I think that does capture the imagination. The idea of light and darkness, and you'll see that in my
Mhm.
Shabbat inspiration video a little bit, that light becomes the operating metaphor of
Yeah,
Hanukkah in
yeah.
so many different ways.
Good, good.
Anything else about this?
The brilliance of the sages. Or the rabbis.
Oh, or the importance of the sages instituting this for perpetuity. Now the sages establishing it as a holiday. I don't know, I would use the word brilliance, but importance. The authority of the sages. That's the punchline.
Yeah,
Mm.
I think so.
Mm.
Yeah.
Well, they recognized it as a symbol that could be extended throughout all of Jewish history.
Right. And
so-
they hold that power and that authority.
Hmm.
Anyone in the Zoom room? I just want to give a moment.
Yeah,
to-
I was thinking, Rabba, about the number 8, but that's kind of a no-brainer there. Since it
Well,
appears in
I
other,
for granted, I don't think it's a no-brainer at all. So 8 days, why did it last for 8 days? Or what are you asking, Francis? Why did it need to last for 8 days?
well, I'm just saying that it appears in other Pesach circumcision, all kinds of things that the number 8 Kabbalistic stuff, I don't know, but I'm just wondering why it's 8 and not.
Well, it's to guarantee
Something
that
else.
there's a Shabbat somewhere in
So
there too.
eight,
Yeah.
yeah, 8 is a
Potentially.
significant number already, you're saying, in different
The
areas of
beginning of
of
the
Jewish
new
life.
Not necessarily.
Absolutely. And so you could say, because it's
It's
circumcision,
to make sure
you
it
could say, as many claim in this context, that it just, they knew it would take them 8 days to make new oil. But it doesn't say that here.
No,
It doesn't say any reason here. Okay. I'm gonna move forward.
Yeah.
So first Maccabees, and I have to think of Rabbi Binny Lau. I just recently heard him speak about these different texts. And he said this voice in First Maccabees is really about the nationalism and the wars being about their political and religious identity. So you can see in this excerpt, Mattathias, right? Mattatyahu, the Maccabee, stands up and says, though all the nations that are under the king's dominion obey him and fall away, everyone from the religion of their fathers, and give consent to his commandments, yet will I and my sons and my brethren walk in the covenant of our fathers. We want to maintain our national identity. God forbid that we should forsake the mitzvot and the brit. These are the words that are in the Hebrew, the covenant, the law, the ordinances, and we will not hearken to the king's word or go from our religion, whether to the left or the right. We're not going to stray. And that left and right, it doesn't, in the Hebrew, it says lo namir, we will not swerve.
veer off the path.
Veer, but that does give a reference to biblical passages that say, do not veer from these paths, do not veer stray.
Yeah,
Right. We're not going to read this very lengthy excerpt, except to look at the part that I underlined in the English, and my Zoom friends are just bear with me as I scroll and scroll and scroll and scroll. This is where they get into the sanctum and they take stones and they build a new altar, because the previous altar had been, I can't remember if it's pulled, it was destroyed or it was
defiled.
defiled.
It says profaned.
Profaned, there we go. They saw the altar was profaned. They saw the sanctuary was desolate, right? All of this stuff was ruined.
But
So
a lot
they-
of time must have passed if all these shrubs have grown up and.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. It's several years of a battle.
Years.
And so they have to build a new altar, verse 46. And then in 47, they make up that sanctuary, and then they make new kalim, more holy vessels.
Hmm.
The kalim, the vessels are what? The
Store the oil.
menorah and the mizbeach, the altar, all the things, right?
I'm surprised they can't just dunk them in the mikveh, like, so you have to build a
Right, that they had to destroy them. It might have to do with the fact that they're made of stone, and stone can't be purified. It has to be
not that, if they're using, they said that any
the
of the
vessels.
most of
Oh,
them
thank
are-
you, the
would be
metal. Yes,
silver,
yes.
Would be
Good
sterling
point.
silver.
It's like they had to start from scratch because they were defiled with idolatry and all kinds of immorality. So they make everything new, the menorah and the altar. There are 2 altars, right? The altar of the offerings and the altar of the incense and the shulchan. And then they light the lights and everything is restored. They set the loaves upon the shulchan. That's verse 50. That's the lechem hapanim. And they finish, the curtains, everything. And on the 25th day of the month of Kislev, basically they offer the sacrifices, and I'm just skipping down verse 53. They fall on their faces, worshiping and praising God, thanking God, and they keep that dedication, that rededication of the altar for 8 days. Doesn't say anything about oil. It doesn't say anything about why 8 days, but remember when they first dedicated the Mishkan, before there was a temple, they had that tabernacle dedication. It's a 7-day ceremony. On the 8th day, they start. So there's precedence from the Bible, from the Torah itself. Like, of course, an 8-day ceremony made sense of rejoicing and of sacrifices. That's it.
Yeah.
I mean, the menorah here isn't any more or less important than the altars. It's part of restoring the sanctuary. So this is very different mythology, if you will, a very different story. Now, going forward, I'm looking at now the second book of Maccabees. And the second book of Maccabees focuses on the religion much, much more. So the first, of course, the religion and the sacrifices is part of it, but it's defiling their identity, their national identity. And here it's about their religious worship and their religious practice. So the second book of Maccabees, also they're excited, they're happy, they're praising, they're falling on their faces. They say, please God, protect us. And they confess their sins, verse 7, punish us with kindness, that means have mercy on us, and don't give us any more into the hands of these other nations. And so on the 25th of Kislev, they celebrate a festival. Look at verse 9. Why did they celebrate a festival for 8 days? Because the festival of Sukkot, they remembered the previous days when they celebrated the festival of Sukkot in the mountains and in the caves. So now I'm in the book of Maccabees 2. I'm sorry, it's source number 4. I numbered all the sources. Source number 4, verse 9. Vayachogu chag laHashem shmonat yamim ki yemei chag haSukkot. They celebrated a festival to God for 8 days, like the festival of Sukkot. Vayizkiru et hayamim mikodem. They remembered the previous times, previous days. Bechagagam et chag haSukkot baharim u'bame'arot. They celebrated while they were doing their guerrilla warfare in the caves. Vayitu bishimon ki behemot sadeh. They were like wild beasts in the desolate fields. So they couldn't be like proper men in their temples when that most recent holiday of Sukkot happened. That was just the most recent celebration that they missed. And so they did a redo of Sukkot. Arvei Nachal, Kapot Marim. They took the willows and the palm tree. They took their lulavs because they missed it the last time. And they sang songs of praise. Shir Shevach v'hodaya laHashem, asher natan lahem uteshu'ah l'taheret beit mikdasho. Gave them, oz uteshu'ah, strength and salvation. And they purified their temple. And they then sent out word that this should be a festival every year. To always remember on the 25th of Kislev that they were able to restore their temple and their practices.
What is the time frame relative to Christianity for this?
Okay, so the Maccabees revolt is around the year 167 BCE, something like that. There's not Christianity yet.
Okay, because I was thinking,
But the writing of these texts
is
is probably around the 1st century CE.
okay. Thank you for putting it in perspective,
Yes.
because it's
Sorry, I should have just said that at the beginning.
no, I
usually
felt
say where we
stupid,
are
but
and
I
when
said
we are. No,
I'm gonna,
it's really, really important.
I'm gonna.
The events of the Greeks and the Hellenists
Was before.
they restored their temple, and it lasted another couple hundred years.
Yeah.
Before then the Romans came and destroyed it, and that's around the advent of Christianity.
Okay, the reason I'm asking that is
Yeah.
because, the 25th of Kislev, it's like the 25th of December, and
Oh, not yet. No,
and
no,
right, so
no,
I can
that's
forget
that's,
about that.
that's an anachronism. But that's so interesting. I don't know. I don't have a good answer about that.
No, I'm just
But-
saying that, in terms of taking prominence, that the Jewish
Mhm.
holiday
Yeah, well,
should be just
we'll-
as good as the.
Hold on to that till the end of
Okay.
our story,
Fair.
because that is going to be that's going to influence our modern celebration, of course, of the holiday. So no cruise of oil.
So what came first?
Thank you for asking. The Talmud story is much, much, much later. So
this
the
is
editors of the Talmud
Yes.
discover a story that maybe was passed down orally. The book of Maccabees is written around, let's say around the 1st century of the Common Era. The rabbis of the Mishnah around that same time are not writing anything about Hanukkah. And so we're gonna see, actually, there's a scholar who notes this. I'm gonna skip down to him.
Sorry, when
Source
was the
number
Gemara
6.
part written?
I'm
When is the
sorry?
Gemara?
And the Gemara is codified around the year 600, which means these texts are a bit earlier. Let's say even 300, 400, 500.
So it's 500 years
CE.
difference.
Huge difference. 600 years after the events happened. It really feels
There's no
like a
eyewitness
myth.
left around to verify.
A
it.
real myth. So as I answer your comment, Marilyn, I'm encouraging us to skip ahead to source number 6. Yes, what did you want to say?
Oh, the Maccabees were 167 to 63 BCE.
Yeah.
Right,
Now, the second temple was destroyed in
70 CE,
CE.
right.
Okay, so you're.
So it lasted a couple hundred
Yeah.
years from the
Right, so then
restoration
you're
of this.
after
temple.
the second temple, the sages are trying to figure out how do they keep Judaism alive? And this is one of the tools in the toolbox.
Yeah.
Right, so they're gonna tell a different story because they don't have a nationhood. They've been ousted from their land.
Mhm.
That's right. How do you?
They
hold
don't
parallel?
have
Yeah,
a relevant
It
tale to
seems
tell
so
of
close.
a modern day Maccabee, but they have menorahs and they have oil and they have God and they have light and they have miracles. And actually, Benny Lau was saying that there was something even in the Babylonian culture, which is where they exiled to, about the centrality of fire and
Mhm.
oil. So look at this, Professor. I have to thank Safaria for helping me find this text. And I'm reading now from source number 6. We skipped over our Al Hanisim and our Siddur. Maybe we'll go back if we have time. I should have put it at the end. Despite its prominence in Jewish life since the Middle Ages, right? That's when we really, really started to love Hanukkah. I'm on source number 6, Marilyn, if you can find it. Our Zoomers know that I'm just scrolling for them. Was there a comment in the chat? Despite its prominence in Jewish life since the Middle Ages, Hanukkah is the only holiday in the Jewish calendar that does not have a corresponding Mishnaic tractate. So let's remember, the Maccabees story happened in 167 BCE. Fast forward the destruction of the temple in 70 CE, the codification of the Mishnah in 200 CE. Codification of the Mishnah has no tractate called Hanukkah. Has a tractate called Megillah about Purim. Doesn't have a tract, which is also a rabbinic holiday. That's why I'm mentioning it.
Okay.
Right, it's not a biblical holiday.
Yeah.
It has a tractate, of course, of Shabbat and Pesach, Sukkot. Okay. Hanukkah is the only holiday in the Jewish calendar that does not have a corresponding Mishnaic tractate. Indeed, the holiday is mentioned in the Mishnah only 7 times and always in passing. Like, oh, the Shabbat candles, the Hanukkah candles, that kind of thing. While other classical Palestinian rabbinic works like the Tosefta and the Yerushalmi, those are other rabbinic contemporaneous works, devote somewhat more discussion to the festival. It is only in the Babylonian Talmud that we find the basic contours of Hanukkah as we know it today, with that story of the oil. Rabbinic disinterest in Hanukkah is widely assumed to reflect broad ambivalence regarding the historical actors who established the holiday. Prominent 19th and 20th centuries historians of Judaism have argued that rabbinic disapproval of the Hasmoneans lay behind the lack of enthusiasm for Hanukkah in rabbinic literature. Even earlier, traditional scholars, such as the leading early 19th century Ashkenazic rabbi Chatam Sofer, explain the reason for this lacuna as stemming from the compiler of the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda, the Nasi, the patriarch, disapproval of the Hasmonean dynasty. Why would they disapprove? Why would the rabbis be disapproving of this
The Hashmonaim.
activism or fighting of the Hashmonaim?
What were the Hasmoneans, were they?
They were not contemporaneous with the rabbis. These
No.
are the Maccabees and
That's right, but I mean-
those heroes.
Weren't Jews pretty assimilated into Greek life already?
Yes,
And they maybe disapproved of that, like,
yes. So they maybe felt they were too Hellenized in that era, but the Hashmonaim, I think, were up against the Hellenized Jews. but they were uprising. So I think it has more to do with this debate about how should they act against Rome. Should they, and these were the debates around 70 CE.
Oh, there was
Should
fierce,
they-
fierce, fierce
Should they be
debates.
fighting back
Yes.
against
Mhm.
Rome,
Mhm.
or should they acquiesce? And this was the Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai going and saying, we give up, just Tainli Yavne, give me the yeshivas
Mhm.
of learning, give me the rabbis, because I know that text is the future of Judaism, not political uprising. They didn't like
Mhm.
what that's my sense of it, and I would have to read this Professor Ophir Muzmanor's entire work to know,
Josephus thinks
that-
they were crazy to resist. the
right,
kind of-
that they were resisting.
Yeah, I mean, and I think
And-
he was
and
right,
He,
because.
they
the-
suffered because
the
of that.
Carnage.
That
the
was
carnage.
exactly, yeah,
Terrible.
yeah. So you could understand why the rabbis who felt they shouldn't have fought that war against Rome would say, let's not aggrandize these Maccabees for having fought the war against the Greeks.
That makes sense.
It was an editorial choice. They
Maybe.
didn't want that to
But
be
with
the
hindsight, it was
model.
hindsight.
And it was,
Right.
but it was really about
Because-
their current state. Look, this is also the rabbis of the Talmud is are post-destruction of the temple. So
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
Rome is no longer, it's Rome is no longer, the temple is
It's
destroyed. They're in
retrospect- it's a
Babylonia.
retrospective.
It
But
was
still,
weird. It could have been a huge loss too, like it was just
And
a lucky.
and
win.
maybe
Yeah.
they don't want, and they don't want people uprising against the Babylonian king. They're not gonna tell that story.
That's very interesting.
What did you want to say, Marilyn?
Oh, it had to do also with lineage. The Hasmonean
Mhm.
line was not
Oh.
accepted
Right.
as a true lineage. And in Babylon,
Mm.
they were welcomed and they were given their freedom to a great extent. So they didn't have to feel that they were being threatened, whereas with Rome, they were threatened. So that it becomes
Good.
a very
Mm.
delicate balance of,
So it's who's telling the story, when they're telling the
Mm.
story, what kind of myth they want to sustain. And this was actually why I then brought the Al Hanisim. So now go back up. I'm
Okay.
sorry. You can look at it in the English just on the top of that page. Or it's in the Hebrew on the previous page.
Mhm.
This is what makes it into the Siddur. Now the Siddur is later.
Mhm.
I'm not familiar enough with who composed source number 5, the Al Hanisim, but this is incorporated into the Siddur, that this stays as the religious tale that we
Mhm.
tell. That the Greeks made them forget your Torah and turn away from the commandments.
Mhm.
And even though this doesn't talk about the miracle of 8 days and the oil burning, it's that you, God, saved them. You defended their cause. You avenged them. You delivered the mighty into the hands of the weak, the many into the hands of the few, the impure into the hands of the pure,
Mhm.
the wicked into the hands of the righteous, the sinners into the hands of Torah students. You aggrandized your name, God, and they entered into the temple and they purified it and lit the candles. Like that's actually the bottom line here. It's in the Hebrew, "Acharechein ba'u v'nacha ledvir beitecha, ufinu et heichalecha, v'tziharu et mikdashecha." They purified, they cleaned, they purified, v'hidliku nerot,
Mm.
and lit the candles, and kavu shemonat yemei Chanukah, and they established these 8 days of Chanukah for days of praise. That's the story.
Mhm.
They got they got to keep their Judaism. They were holy and pure, winning against the impure and the idolaters,
Mhm.
and they got their temple back and lit their lights.
it was a source of doctrine,
Yeah.
strength. Because look at the IDF, they're
Uh,
on the Maccabees,
Yes.
on the Mount, that's where they take their vows.
But they're not a
That's the
religious-
doctrine of the second temple.
But it's not a religious narrative for the IDF itself. It is for the Dati Leumit, the religious Zionist camp, saying that this is religious nationalism, and
But it's a
this is
place
why we're
of- a
fighting for
source
our
of
religious
strength.
homeland.
Whether you take it from the religious or the doctrine
Sure,
or the
sure.
political, it's part of the mythology of the foundations
Mhm,
that one
Mhm.
uses,
mhm.
either it's conscious or not conscious.
I want to pause and ask if anyone in the Zoom wants to jump in, because I know it's hard to if I don't give that.
I
Sandra.
was just thinking in terms of when you asked the question, why? There was a lot of politics that went on all the way even in the times of the temple. So the politics here is, if you even look at Allah Nisim, and you look what it says, it is not dealing. It's dealing with a step away from the violence where the Hasmoneans are active in it. So here you're dealing with God did this. They don't
Yes,
mention.
Yes.
Yes. So it's the type of thing where you got the learned that are studying.
Right.
So there's the dichotomy, and there's a pull and tug between these two groups. And there always was. Look, modern day, the ultra religious do not participate in the army. Yes, the Dutch do, but the ultra religious don't. They stay in their yeshivot and study.
And you know what, but I appreciate, Sandra, the comment that if we put it on God, it means God did this.
Yep.
Not us.
Not us.
And even the religious soldiers will say we had a miraculous victory. God helped us, prevail over our enemies. I don't know if it's to diffuse responsibility, but you could say that here. You could say that in terms of the prevailing narrative. That God, saw our sins, brought us into the hands of our enemies, and then saw our righteousness and saved us from our enemies.
Yeah, it's not, but it's it's kind of like the Jews
It protects the people.
An active role in terms of when they imbue it in terms of their tefillah. It's like,
and by the way, Sandra, that's why you could say the ultra Orthodox generally don't fight in the army. They're waiting for God to save us, Messiah to save us, not
but
us.
if we did that in 1948, we wouldn't be here. Sorry.
Okay, but they're not Zionists, and they don't celebrate 1948. The ones, not all of them. There are Haredim who fight in the army. There are.
Yeah, there's always exceptions.
You wanted to say something?
Would this be the first Jewish religious war? I've heard it referred to as that. The first where that you're fighting to circumcision will continue. We want to observe.
Well, in order to say it's a Jewish war, you have to have a nationalism of Jew. We don't even call it Jew until there was Judea. A religious.
The first religious war.
Wouldn't that? But what about all the wars we read about in the book of Joshua as they're conquering the land of Israel, or like the biblical wars of all the kings against the Plishtim,
Amalekites.
Yeah.
Okay, you'd equate that. This
National and religious.
It's an uprising, but it's it's compared to a real war. You would hardly call it it's a faction. It's a factional uprising.
I think actually what we're struggling with is the fact that nationhood and religion were not separate.
We weren't a nation.
Identity.
No, we were Jews that wanted to do certain things that we're going to fight for now.
But in the way that it is phrased against idolatry, that's interesting. We're here to eradicate. I don't know. I have to think about how we frame that. And actually, this is a good segue. There's one more piece I wanted to think about. So I'd like to do two things. First, I want to look back at our Talmud story, the first one that we just started with. And then I'm going to show you one more Talmud story, which is the last text that we'll look at. So go back to the beginning. What is Hanukkah? Now, these are the rabbis of the Talmud asking themselves around the years 400, 500, 600, asking themselves, what is Hanukkah about? It's that they came into the sanctuary, they defiled the oils, the Hashmonaim overcame them and were victorious. They found just one cruse of oil, not and showbreads. They baked the showbreads. I don't know, could have been anything, right? But they lit these candles that were pure, and a miracle happened.
La-di-da-da-da.
Yeah.
I think it's brilliant.
Yeah.
I call it brilliant. I'll
You like
stand.
it?
The Rabbi Shushat used to talk a lot about this. You remember the brilliance of what the rabbis did with Hanukkah.
Mm,
And
you
I
did?
love it. It makes sense to me more now even.
Mhm.
So there's one other piece that we haven't talked about, but you alluded to the other holidays of the season.
Mhm.
We haven't yet alluded to the season
Mm.
in the Northern Hemisphere, at least, where it's the season of darkness.
Yeah.
So there is another narrative,
Mhm.
and this is my second favorite, because my absolute favorite is the last text on our source sheet, which is about the season of darkness.
Mm.
I'm skimming. Sorry for my zoomers. It's going to take a second. And I will read it in the Hebrew for those who want to follow in the Hebrew. Tanu Rabbanan, our rabbis taught. Now, this is another tractate, Avodah Zarah. So it doesn't matter that it's in Avodah Zarah or it's in Shabbat, but it does matter in this case because it's going to refer to the fact that we have pagan holidays in the months of darkness.
Yeah.
Every pagan cult would have a holiday of like bringing light to the darkness.
Right.
And of course, Christmas
Mhm.
and Kwanzaa, right? But this gives it a connection
Wait a
to
minute, sorry. isn't
Adam.
Kwanzaa African and.
yeah. Later.
No, but it's in Africa below.
Oh, but I thought Kwanzaa is a North American,
Oh, they invented it in North
African
America.
American. I thought.
No, you might be right. I don't know anything about it. I had assumed that they had imported it from African legend or African folklore or whatever, but
Is Kwanzaa a North American holiday? Yeah, it's primarily an African American holiday. It also has come
Oh.
to be celebrated outside the United States.
oh, I see. Okay, so it's North
There.
America. All right.
Good question. Very important question if we're talking about the seasons. Lefi shera'a Adam Harishon, when Adam, the first human being, saw Yom Shemit Ma'et Beholech, that the day was getting shorter and shorter and shorter. The first human being, he was created around Rosh Hashanah, according to our tradition. So
Oh,
the
okay.
days are getting shorter.
Yeah.
Amar oili shema bishvil shetarachti olam chashuch ba'adi. Maybe because of my sin, the world is darkening because of me. V'chozer letohu vavo. Eventually, it's going to go back to chaos before the creation of the world.
That is such a pagan idea, though. That man is punished, like, if there's a drought, it must be our
Right.
fault,
Yes,
something's
it's
in, and it
connected
must-
to-
Yeah,
Thank you. That's right. I mean, that's the indigenous people's
yeah. doing the
religion.
Sacrifices to the sun god and the
Yes,
moon god.
we're
and-
connected
Mhm.
implicitly to the natural world around us.
Sure.
And then he says, "V'zohi mita sheniknesa alai min hashamayim." This is death that God is bringing. The heavens are bringing upon me because of my sin. V'yashav shmona yamim ta'anit. He sat for 8 days of fasting and prayer.
But he hadn't
B'tfilah.
sinned yet.
No, he had sinned right
Yeah.
away. The sin of the garden was
Yeah.
right away. At least in the rabbinic
In the first
text,
bit.
it's like the first day.
Mhm.
Oh, really?
Yes.
But I thought they were kicked out after it happened.
They were kicked out right away. They only got to be there for like a day.
Oh,
At least according to the Gemara. Yeah, no, it's disappointing.
Yeah.
Then the Midrash says they asked God, let us stay for Shabbat. We sinned on
Oh,
Friday.
yeah,
Let us
right.
stay for Shabbat.
that's fanciful.
And
That's
then
a
on
bit
Saturday
fanciful, yeah.
night, God said, okay, now you're out. God created fire to help them manage in their new dark world. A world
What a
where they
great
had to
story.
create.
What a great
Yeah.
Going
But
back to the
Avon-
connection with the land, you also have Masechet Tanit, where in terms of when you don't have rain and there's fasting.
Yes, exactly. Thank you. Kevan Shera'at Kufat Tevet, when they got to the month of Tevet, which is right after the winter solstice, V'ra'a Yom Shema Arich Veholech, the day is getting longer again. Amar, Min Hago Shel Olam Hu, That's just the way of the world.
Mm.
The days are gonna get shorter and then the days will get longer. Aha, the earth is on a tilt. I had no idea. It's tilted on its axis. That's why we have short days and long days.
So now we know that the Garden of Eden was in the northern hemisphere.
Yeah, well, it's in the land of Israel. It's near there somewhere.
there.
Somewhere in the Fertile Crescent. Halach ve'asa shmona yamim tovim. He made then 8 days of festivities. The Shana Acheret, and then the next day, I see there's a hand. The Asa'an le'elu ule'elu yamim tovim. Those made it a festival. Hu kva'um l'shem shamayim. Adam, of course, made it a festival for the sake of heaven. But Haim, the idolaters, kva'um l'shem avodat kochavim, made it an idolatrous, a pagan holiday. But everybody has a holiday in the times of darkness. It doesn't exactly line up with the 25th of Kislev, because the 25th of Kislev would be, well, actually, I guess it depends.
If there's an
Kufat
adult
Tevet
death.
means the time of the month of Tevet. Hanukkah's 8 days ends already when we've entered into Tevet, but it starts at the end of Kislev. We could massage that.
Yeah.
Annie, I saw your hand. Go ahead.
Yes, as we speak, this is the first Shabbos that is 1 minute later for candlelight.
Oh, that's right.
This is the first day that's going to be 1 minute longer of daylight.
Winter
and
We're
then
not
we
yet,
light-
not yet technically at the solstice, which would be on the 21st.
But
Yeah.
we go by the Shabbat
Times.
candle lighting.
Yes,
We go by
Shabbat
the
times have
dark-
gotten shorter and shorter and
Yeah.
shorter, and now they're gonna finally start
Havdalah is gonna be later.
to inch. Yeah, 1 minute. That's true, Annie. By next week, we'll start.
Every week,
Yeah,
a little bit.
Yeah,
more
it ends
daylight.
at 5:03 instead of at 5:01 on Saturday night.
And then the next day we light the Hanukkah candle. So
Right.
it's even more daylight, even more light in the
More
night.
light. So this is now why we in the modern era double down on the oil story.
Yes.
Because it makes sense with our light and dark motif
Mhm.
of this time of year. It makes sense because every religion gives us a light holiday.
So interesting.
So we've come from an era where it was about religious practice, and it was about nationalism, and it was about the right to circumcise your sons or whatever it was, up through the post-temple era where they made it really about the miracle of the oil and the light of Adam, the first Adam, which is obviously, I mean, to tell a story about Adam having a festival
Yeah.
that had to do with Maccabees, like it's weaving very disparate narratives together. But today, both of those really make sense in our Christian calendar.
Yes.
The miracle of the
Yes.
oil and the miracle of light.
You said it became popular in medieval times. Is that, do
Hmm,
you think it was motivated by not opposition to, but
The
a kind
Christian,
of challenge to
a good
make sure that they had their own
balance.
thing at a time when
I wonder, it would make sense because those were the days of terrible Christian persecution.
What happened with the Muslims? Do they have any kind of holiday with light?
Oh, the problem with the Muslims is not the problem, but the problem for their religion is that their calendar moves around
Yeah.
the year. So they can't have anything that's seasonal.
Ramadan's all over the year.
Yeah, they don't adjust
No.
they're on the lunar calendar. The lunar year is 11 days shorter than the solar year. So their holidays keep moving and moving and moving. We get the leap month because our
Mhm.
holidays are also agricultural festivals.
But it's
So
not
we
just
have to
that, the rabbis established such that so our calendar does not move so much, so you're ending up
Yeah,
celebrating.
so their
holidays
lunar
all the time.
calendar doesn't interact with the solar year at all.
Very
The
tough
poor
for them to
Muslims.
have Ramadan in the summer
I know.
because
I
the-
think about that a
I
lot.
think about that a lot because I can't even imagine going from sunrise to sunset without eating.
Yeah, and when sunrise is at 4 in the
And then
morning
you
and
have to stuff
sunset is at
yourself
9
in the
PM.
4 hours. Imagine if you're a Muslim living in Scandinavia, where
Oh, yeah, what
it's
do they
like-
do?
Like it's
Midnight.
midnight, it's still
Midnight
light at
sun, yeah,
midnight,
yeah.
and it isn't, no, seriously.
I know.
Or
They
you're
must
right.
have some, we have that
connect-
legal conversation about when do you light Shabbos candles if
Shabbat,
the sun
yeah,
sets,
Shabbat.
right? What about the Chabad of Alaska?
Exactly.
I'm sure they've figured it out. Or
Yeah.
maybe there is no Chabad in Alaska for that reason. If you can't give out Shabbos candles to the Jewish women, sorry. But those are debates that Judaism
Yeah.
has
Yeah.
as well. And there are answers. There are answers. So
That's so
So what's the
interesting.
conclusion?
what's the story of Hanukkah?
It's a myth.
What is the story of Hanukkah? What it was, so I think the answer is we should say, what are the stories of Hanukkah? That's the answer. We'll
The
answer the
answer is,
question with
and-
another question.
As long as we all light the candles, recognize that it is a myth, it's time for
And,
children to enjoy.
and eat lots of
And
latkes.
eat
Yeah.
lots, yes.
Get there.
Well, and I think what your answer is, it's about our practice, that, you know, because Judaism is so focused on Jewish law, Jewish practice, it actually matters so much less, you know, what the story, which story we choose to tell. I've heard the story of assimilation being the story
Yeah, yeah.
so often,
Mhm.
because that's top of mind for so many people these days, that it was about being proud to have a distinct religion and putting those Hanukkah candles right in the windowsill,
Exactly.
saying we are different and we're proud that we don't have a Christmas tree. And those are people that get upset at the Hanukkah bush and the Christmas or whatever,
Mhm.
which are very important for some families who are interfaith families and
Mhm.
who want to celebrate both traditions, right? So that's the 21st century debate that I hear
Yes.
emerging.
But the Christmas tree itself was only invented in Victorian England. I mean, like before
It's
that,
all,
it was like.
it's all symbolic, right? What is it
Dickens
symbolic of?
invented Christmas as we know it.
Really?
He did.
Yeah.
It was before Dickens. There
Oh,
was
that's so
no,
interesting.
Mhm.
was not the exchange of presents, Christmas
Yes.
cards.
So on Bonjour
All that.
Chai this week, my husband was interviewing, or last week's episode was interviewing two people about Hanukkah merch, like the
Yeah.
Christmas
Oh, yeah.
sweaters.
Yes.
Now there are
Oh, yeah.
Hanukkah sweaters
Yeah,
and
ugly Hanukkah sweaters, yeah.
Hanukkah pajamas and Hanukkah, all kinds of
Yeah,
Hanukkah things.
consumerism
And
at
that
its-
was
yeah.
created really in the late 20th century. The woman, Rabba Yael Buchler, she says it was in the 90s when e-commerce
Mhm.
was starting and even, no, she says it skyrocketed in the 2010s with e-commerce. But she says it was in the 90s when, I forgot what she connected it to, the millennials or something, that people started making Christmas merch and Hanukkah merch. It was only because you needed something for the Jews to buy or to Jews to feel
Yeah,
seen. Francis is making a comment in the chat. Martin Luther started the Christmas tree. I don't know.
It came from Germany, from what I understand, from when I
It was a
studied a long
Yule
time
fest- it
ago.
was- They had the tree, but this decorating and making it the essential, it was a Yule festival, a festival of lights because of this winter darkness.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
it did come
It
from
was
a
a Jewish
pagan.
entrepreneur,
whatever.
Mr. Tannenbaum. He started
Yeah,
that.
maybe that whole thing started in Germany, but in England, I understand that it
Yeah.
became a thing in Victorian England. And it
Yeah, I
was
don't know enough
largely
about it.
fostered by
Became
Dickens.
popularized, yeah.
Yeah,
Well, it's possible because Queen Victoria married somebody from Germany, so it's,
true. That is true.
Okay, thank
Albert was from
you.
Germany.
Oh, I love the expertise in our room.
It's
It's really
actually-
helpful.
Didn't think of-
We're gonna stop here
But
and we're gonna encourage everyone to tell all of the Hanukkah stories
Mhm.
and see which one sticks. It'll be an interesting experiment with
Yes.
whichever Hanukkah tables you find yourselves around.
Yes, this is interesting.
we're celebrating that we're a minority.
Oh,
Oh.
thank you. Touche.
Rachel, about 30 years ago, I wasn't teaching
Minority
high
is
school
not
students,
a
but
land.
No, I said
I
a
brought-
minority.
I brought those
Minor-
sources of
minority.
Maccabee, Aleph and Bet to my sixth graders.
Barbara, I'm
Oh.
surprised you were not.
I
looking
know,
at that.
I missed that.
And I'm sure that blew their minds, that
That's
there's a book
very
of
good.
Maccabees.
Very good, I like
I'm
that.
branching it.
I want to just calendar with all of you for a moment. So we're taking our break. I'm gonna go see Max in Chicago.
Say hi to us. her.
And I'll bring her all of your regards.
Chicago.
And I'm just getting back that second, we're gonna start January 18th.
Okay.
That's when we're going
High
to
of
resume.
January.
High January, we're going to resume. We'll come back to our good friend Ruth
Goodbye.
Calderon.
When do the day schools start back? Do you know?
We start back to the week of January 9th, the schools are back in. And,
Schools?
oh, I almost forgot, I'm gonna send you all in the Zoom, the link to this Safaria source sheet. I apologize, I hadn't put it in at the beginning. I was focused on. Oh, thank you. Francis gave us in the Zoom the history of the Christmas tree.
Hmm.
So you can go to history.com, for those of you who are not on Zoom. You can go to history.com and look up the history of Christmas trees. And if that's what you got from this Hanukkah class, my work here is done.
Weren't we envious of our friends growing up?
No.
At Christmas, you
Christmas
never were.
envy, always.
Thanks,
I'm
everyone.
so proud.
Hug.